Hi, everybody. If you're watching this on your lovely Friday, happy Friday. And if you're getting it at any other time on catch up, just really grateful that you're logging in, having a listen. This is your deep dive this week. Again, always so grateful to Bon for trusting me with these little sessions, these little seminars and workshops. So welcome. I really enjoyed last week's conversation. Obviously, spending some time just looking at like how we build a new identity and growing beyond that trauma. This week, we're going to take it to another realm, and we're going to look a little bit about the need for approval. And I think that that's a really powerful thing to explore because I think sometimes when we are on this transition and a journey and we feel like we're changing, you start to have certain feelings. We start to see people in new ways. And I think it's sometimes very hard to figure out the people that count and the people that don't count. And so today, the title is just that our need for approval and the people that count and don't. And I really want us to kind of take some time to reflect. Maybe as we have this conversation, I'll give you a little bit of either a journaling tip or just a little bit of thinking time at the beginning, just to bring in your mind's eye and your head and your thinking. If there are people, one, maybe a few, that you maybe find that relationship has some question marks around it. Maybe as you find yourself growing and maybe finding yourself in a new way, exploring this new identity, you're wondering if this person is still a healthy person for you. And what does this new world look like? What are the people and who are those people? That make me feel good. And how did that link in with, that feeling of needing approval? And when someone thinks about approval, it might sound like a simple thing. Everyone likes to feel seen. Everybody likes to feel valued. Think about a workplace, how many of us have left jobs or, felt uncomfortable in a job because we didn't feel valued. I think that that is like such a key thing as a human being. If we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's like this space where we have like our physiological needs need to be met as human beings. But as we go up the ladder, like the third rung is belonging. And the ones below it are just about our actual physical being in terms of like climbing up. And I know that that structure has been changed and shifted and explored in many different ways, but I do think that Maslow's hierarchy of needs does have a place for our study and for us to explore, those human needs and how we feel fulfilled. So in particular, that need to feel seen, that need to feel heard, listened to, accepted is powerful. And especially those of us, I say us, I definitely have come from that same background as I shared last week a little bit. Those of us who've been through trauma, approval can become something much deeper and much heavier. Actually, approval feels like survival. And that is something that I will say to you. It's very easy to transfer that need to for approval in so many aspects of our lives, and maybe sometimes never still feeling enough. So today we're going to really unpack why the need for approval can become just so strong, how it shows up differently than kind of the idealization of like people pleasing. And sometimes that's what it is, but sometimes it shows up differently. We're going to look as well at why trauma wires our brain and our body to kind of depend on that approval. We'll explore what likely happened maybe in childhood to shape this pattern and how healing the root cause of trauma. I think that that's what Bond and this program do so well. It just helps us to step into that more authentic identity we explored last week, one that really isn't ruled by other people's opinions. And I think that that helps, I'm just throwing my own background in terms of like the whole, like the body keeps the score book, an analogy that, the world is starting to really shift to a place that we hold a lot of our emotion and that tightness in the body. But we often have it synonymous with the chest and the throat and the tight breath and the difficulty to speak what we wanted to say. Do you ever leave a conversation with somebody? It's often, linked maybe to a parental figure. It's hard to say no sometimes. And that's like that throat chakra as such, maybe from a holistic healing point of view, feeling like a little bit blocked. There's this element of, feeling stuck as such, and doing what other people want. But as we shift and grow, we need to find our voice again and find our way through. So let's start here with the emotions behind the approval seeking. Let's start with what it feels like. So when somebody constantly seeks approval, the emotions are often a mix of anxiety, fear, and insecurity. There's like a nervous edge about it. So, will they like me? Did I do enough? Am I okay in their eyes? I found myself kind of like in my, if I reflected on my relationships from like in my 20s, and even a few that I've kept like in my 30s, and obviously now turning 40, I wanted to just share with you that I can actually notice, since doing this work, the relationships that I had, even friendships, I was choosing friendships where the characters that I had were obviously nice, kind people for the most part, but people that liked to be in control. I found that I liked being told, I suppose, where we were going, what, I almost lost my own identity in it because I felt that I was liked because I was the person that was like, yeah, I like that too. Oh yeah, I'm the same as that. Or yeah. And then I would walk away and be like, am I really the same as that? I found that the language that was naturally coming to me was looking and feeling like belonging, feeling part of something. But it got to the point where like I would be nervous around like one particular friend because they had said to me things like, if you keep saying no to hanging out, we're just not going to hang out with you, or those people aren't your friends. It sounds a bit petty, but this was even in like adult life. Like they're only your friends because I introduced you to them. They're mine. And I don't want you seeing them outside of like the group. And then went on to like go and hang out with those people and excluded me. And even in like adulthood, we see this like shift into almost like that childhood pettiness. But I remember within myself, I used to, the second that this friend would text, like I would get like a almost like this overwhelming anxious feeling. I keep using this like physical movement of like lifting up. Like I imagine it like this meerkat. I'm going, I must reply now or else they're not going to like me. I must say yes. I must. And it almost became like just part of me based on like my past. And I did, if I were to look back, I have had a few friendships that mirrored the same thing. I might have walked away from one, but then found one with very similar qualities. And I think that that's because it probably felt, before this journey of growth, before understanding, it's okay if somebody doesn't like me, or actually, would they do that for me? Or, there's an incredible book linked to this, guys. If you haven't come across the Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins, it's even a great audio book to listen to if you do any commuting. She's got some great little talks and podcasts, but it's this idea of like shifting. And so let's talk a little bit more about those emotions. But I really think that it's powerful to reflect if you have a person or anybody like that where you feel this need, like I need to please them, I need to do it, and then you take a deep breath and take a step back. The more that we start to kind of just find this moment and this like centered place and this calm nervous system, we can start to see it in a different way rather than like, how high do you want me to jump? So I want you just to kind of reflect if any of this resonates with any people. It could be, parent. It's likely linked sometimes to like those close people in our lives. But the emotional storm often comes with those physical symptoms. So the heart might race, similar to what I was saying, like just a text message would give me that feeling. The stomach feels tight, The chest feels heavy. And that's because the body is running that stress response that we've been talking about so much. And approval has, been deeply linked to that ability, that's that place of safety. Um, so let me explain earlier, there was a point about people pleasing, and people pleasing is different because people pleasing is all about action, saying yes, overcommitting, and doing things for others at the expense of yourself. That might be part of you, but that's a whole other, sounds like simple, but there's a whole other place for that to be explored, and very common, for those of us who've experienced trauma. Sometimes we get to this place, almost this limiting belief that if I do all of these things, then I will be liked and everything will be okay. But on the other side of the coin, approval seeking is part of it. But instead of it being the action, the approval seeking is actually wholeheartedly about our identity. It's the emotional need to feel validated by somebody else before you can feel okay with who you are. And that's a big thing. I remember at one point, like with this one particular friend, I remember it wasn't like if they didn't like what I chose to wear on a night out, for example. I don't know why, but I felt like it was like not a cool outfit. I know that sounds mundane to anybody who's not into fashion, but it was something that, like, at that chapter of my life, trying to find my identity in my late 20s, early 30s, I really felt like I needed validation in everything, even like the sandwich that I chose for lunch. And the work has allowed me to feel comfortable with, all aspects of life and let go of what doesn't matter. And so this is it, trauma is based on trauma and doing that work around it. When trauma survivors are locked into approval seeking, their nervous system literally links other people's reactions to their whole entire sense of worth. And this isn't a weakness, guys. It's not, but it's survival coding. And one of the most magical things about all of this content is that when we start to find language for it and make sense of it, I was able personally to pinpoint it and go, that's me. And that's why this relationship I have with this person feels unhealthy. And it was genuinely, I don't want to say just a friendship, because sometimes friendships feel like family, and sometimes those friendships feel harder to leave than even like romantic relationships. But I do think that, that reflection is really powerful. Can you see yourself in any of that? But that's where approval, it does become much more than just our actions. It's about our identity. So why does trauma do this to us? Right? Why does it do it? And to understand why trauma makes approval so powerful, we really need to look again a little bit more context at the brain. And it's that, like, amygdala, the brain's alarm center. It learns early on what equals danger and what equals safety. And it doesn't always register, the healthiest things for us, but we know we are looking to protect ourselves. And again, let's think about it. If somebody maybe grew up in an environment where criticism, rejection, or even neglect were common, right? The amygdala wired itself to scan for threat in relationships. Approval meant safety. Disapproval felt like danger. And at the time, that prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain, we keep talking about the fact that if we can calm and quiet the alarm sometimes in moments where we just don't need it so loud, we can recognize and be like, hey, this is trying to keep me safe, but I can't think clearly. Then once we can calm the body, calm that amygdala response, that stress response, the prefrontal cortex allows us to kind of regulate our emotions and create really balanced decisions. But especially if trauma has happened when we're younger, I think the fact I keep coming back to is that the brain doesn't fully develop until our mid 20s. It's crazy. I've seen jokes out there. I have a client who's just turned 25. And she and I joked, she was like, yay, my prefrontal cortex is hopefully fully developed. And we really laughed about it. I was like, happy 25th. But I mean, that means for us, we have to go easy on ourselves and our decisions before that and in around that age. I definitely would say that like my eyes opened and I started to see things a little bit different post 25, 26. And we need to learn to forgive ourselves for any of those situations. But it also means during childhood, we were especially vulnerable to the messages that we received, right? If love and approval were conditional, if you do this, then I'm going to love you. If you don't follow what I say, even if those kind of conditional responses were not, set in, for you based on like hate or, most people who are parenting don't maybe even realize they've made it conditional. They just, that was what they followed from their parents. But if love and approval were conditional, maybe in childhood, the brain learned my worth. Everything that I'm worth depends on keeping people happy. So if, the parent in my home is happy, then I know that like, I'm okay. Um, but there's a real shift in the conversation of parenting even at the moment from that. But I don't think there were many books and conversations about it, back in the days when parents were, raising me or generations before that. So over time, like, this pattern of maybe things being conditional gets stored not just in our thoughts, but in the entire body. Trauma is embodied. And that's something that I feel really passionate about. We often talk about the vagus nerve, which connects the brain to the body. It really fires differently under threat. And this is why, disapproval can feel like a punch in the gut or like the ground is dropped from under your feet. I personally can say that it is still something that I work on, even at this chapter of my life, but I'm able to recognize that, definitely in any sort of workplace, sometimes if feedback comes, I sometimes like have to remind myself feedback is growth, Megan, because I have a conditional limited belief that can be triggered still. But I absolutely have the language and the knowledge to breathe and work through that. But I'm not going to say to you that, disapproval or, not, making people happy as such doesn't feel funny in my body. And that's definitely because my own personal experience is this, that approval is something that has, really gripped me and something that I've continued to work on, for years. So I guess I'm just sharing that with you because not to share my, it's not about me, but I feel like sometimes when you connect, on a level like, hey, this person has been through something similar, the stories will always be different. But I just like to share a little bit sometimes that I've been there because I want you to know that, like, just like Bon always says, the journey isn't like linear. It sometimes loop de loops, and still sometimes things trigger me. But I recognize now with this beautiful theory and the research, hey, like that is me going into survival. And that's why I am feeling so threatened by this little bit of feedback, And that's important because it allows us to move through it, move beyond it, not hold it too long, not fixate and ruminate on it. And it allows us to grow. And that is where we're talking about that shift in identity. It's actually, knowledge is so powerful, isn't it? So let's think a little bit more about like maybe what's likely to have happened in our past in terms of that approval seeking. I'll give you a few examples. So most approval seeking patterns kind of trace back, like we said, to that childhood model. Maybe somebody grew up with parents or carers who only appraised achievement, but maybe they criticized mistakes. That we're really in a new age of where we celebrate the steps. It's a new theories. But maybe they felt invisible until they did something good. Be a good girl, be a good boy. I still sometimes catch myself using that language, but trying to figure out like what do I actually mean by that, and why am I saying that as a parent? It's because it's been ingrained in us. But what does that actually mean? And trying to redefine that. Maybe they had a caregiver who was inconsistent. Okay. So loving one moment and rejecting the next. So they learned to constantly chase approval in order to avoid abandonment. Big, right? Big stuff. Maybe you resonate with some of that. If you do, you can kind of just like hold it, write it down. Maybe it's something just to go like, hey, I see myself in that picture. For others, approval maybe became that shield against bullying. That's a thing. So bullying can massively affect us. That is trauma. Rejection or fear of being less than. It's only really in those, or really deeply rooted in those early moments, that the brain created a survival strategy. It was clever. However, it might not be helping us now in this chapter. And that survival message and strategy is, if I can just get them to like me, I'll be safe. Who would have thought, right? Who would have thought that's where we've become? And here's the most important part, that the brain doesn't automatically update the script. When we grow up, the script stays. And even as adults, the old pattern will play out often until we recognize it and we find strategies to work through it. And even for me, still, there are moments that I'm like, hey, that's why I'm feeling this like very intense fight or flight in this moment. Approval equals safety. Disapproval equals threat. And so the next time you recognize maybe in yourself you're feeling that, maybe in a relationship, in a workplace, whatever the scenario, maybe take a deep breath, because that deep breath calms the nervous system. It allows us to kind of quiet the amygdala, the recognizing, being like, hey, my body's just in a safety place. Let me make sense of like what I do need to feel and what this actually is looking like. Because sometimes feedback, or disapproval is not as big in like reality as it might be for those who are trauma survivors. I'm gonna have a quick sip of water. Thanks, team. Skipping over my little words today. So the conflict approval creates, like in our daily lives, is this. One of the hardest parts of approval seeking is the way it creates constant conflict. So imagine someone knows deep down what they want, but the moment they sense disapproval, they freeze. So decisions become almost impossible because every choice feels loaded with risk. If I do this, so here's the language. If I do this, will they be upset with me? Instead of doing what it is that you want, right? Is that a question that you sometimes say to yourself? If I say no, will I lose them? I mean, these are big questions, maybe ones you can replay and write down and come back to whenever you're wondering, like, hey, another one is, if I say yes, will I lose myself? I think that that's a big question. If you say yes, are you kind of moving a little bit more away from like your values and your what you might feel like is a purpose for you, what feels good to you? One of the best bits of advice, it's like maybe a little there's science behind it, but it is, you have to trust that gut feeling. Deep down, theorists have said, deep down what you do and you don't want to do. It's just, that's what Mel Robbins says often in her book, Let Them. She's like, if you ask yourself honestly, you actually know the choice that you want to make. It's just, are you brave enough to make it because of all of the feelings that you're trying to consider around you? There's this great story in one of her books about somebody who wrote to her saying that, like, I know I'm about to get married, but I know in my gut that I don't want to go through this, but everything's been paid for. I don't want to break this person's heart because they're a really good person, but I just know in my gut. And he was kind of challenging her let them theory, and she replied just saying, what's right. It's just, are you going to speak your truth, or are you going to walk in someone else's? And we've all walked in a path that maybe didn't feel, our route. But I think that that's what we're talking about here, is this tug of war, okay, that we feel in ourselves. We do. And I feel like that also just comes with like being an empathetic human being. But there is a space in which, this is our life to live. And you have every right to make the choices that feel good to you, and not to have to always honor what everybody else wants or what people want for you. And this tug of war shows up in families, friendships, Like I said, workplaces, it leaves people drained, confused, and sometimes a little resentful. But the root of it isn't weakness at all. It's sometimes just unresolved trauma running in the background. It's quiet. Um, and yeah, you have to have a little listen, but I'm pretty sure that he did walk away. And the dust settled as such. But yeah, anyways. So here, let's come to this point. The people that count and the people that don't count. Let's kind of explore that bit. So, not everyone's approval carries the same weight, right? I'm sure that you could recognize like there really are some people that can brush off like a stranger's judgment without kind of much thought. You a comment or whatever, and you think, oh, whatever, they mean nothing to me. And I think that that's key because when it comes though from a parent or a partner, a boss, a friend, the reaction is different because sometimes when there is something that means something to you, then we have an emotional response to it versus when it's just like a stranger, I suppose. And that's because the nervous system, again, coming back to that body response, is trained to give more weight to the people who matter most. But the irony is this sometimes trauma survivors give too much weight to the people who shouldn't have that power. I'm sure we can all reflect critical parents, toxic partners, unsupportive colleagues, jealous friendships, or competitive friendships. The trauma bond makes their approval genuinely feel sometimes like life or death, even when it's unhealthy. Right? And healing really does just involve recalibrating this system. It's about asking, write this down or reflect, maybe stop and use it as a lovely journaling activity. But I want you to ask yourself in your life, really kind of pulling the threads from our conversation so far, whose opinion really counts for me now and why? And it doesn't mean that could be good. That could be one that you might want to work on, set new boundaries around, find new responses. Sometimes, and I want to come back to my small little anecdote here about my friend. And we'll learn a little bit more as we move through the talk, but I have kept that friendship, and that friendship now is healthy. And I don't have the same fight or flight reaction. And it wasn't necessarily that person. That person has that leadership and that confidence about them that I desired and that I was seeking approval. But I have found ways to set boundaries, to step back, to still be me and recognize that that person is still a wonderful, deep, beautiful, kind friend. And that sometimes it was just the things I needed to change, and if that change happened and that person was still there, then that means that's a true person, friendship, that's a relationship that is healthy. But there were things that I personally needed to shift in myself. So great question, right? Whose opinion really counts for me right now and why? And just asking yourself that can help you just reevaluate. Let's see what we can do to make it either healthier or explore, your next steps. So yeah, let's look at it. Let's look at this unresolved trauma, our negative beliefs, and continue to kind of find strategy. Our unresolved trauma and negative beliefs is all about like that reasons approval seeking feels so heavy in adulthood is because of the unresolved aspect of it. These old wounds just create the negative beliefs that play and repeat. So we're coming back a little bit more to like last week, I am not enough. That becomes part of our identity. And then we start to feel like actually, hey, I'm all right. I'm starting to recognize that like I'm an all right person. Like I try my best to be kind all the time. When I get it wrong, I apologize and I try and make it right. I go to bed and I do my best every day. Like I actually am enough. And that's not a big-headed thing to say, but feeling enough is a really big thing to work on. But we have to move out of that. We have to recognize if maybe our limiting belief was, I'll be abandoned if I say no. Actually, saying no is very powerful. You get your power back, you get your strength. Just I think I've shared with you before in some of our sessions, but a coach once said to me, like, you have the right in your life just to say no to somebody, and just like, period. Just, you know what? No, like, I'm sorry, that doesn't work for me today. And that's it. But we are almost like, feel like we need to, come back with all of this like reasoning and really justify ourselves. I definitely do that sometimes still. But the this aspect of like, say no, full stop, like, in, or period. We don't owe people an explanation. And the reason why we give it, and we give it with so much detail, and sometimes we go over the top, is because we're still seeking approval for saying no. And you're allowed to say no if something is not there, or right timing, etc. you know Powerful, right? Just try it next time. It'd be just be like, actually, no, I'm sorry, but that's not something for me, but thank you. Or, no, I don't really agree with that, but we can agree to disagree. But that's way more powerful than, doing or making an approval seeking choice. Another one of these aspects, or limiting beliefs, is the thought, I don't deserve happiness unless someone else gives it to me. And I think that's powerful, one that we can all work on a little bit. I think that there's part of, especially, trauma survivors, it's like, I know that I'm a good person and I know that I'm happy because somebody is making me like that. But actually, it's within us, isn't it? It's about, these beliefs aren't truths. They're the echoes of trauma, and remember that it's just all the body protecting us. So until we get to that root, until we get to that like limiting belief and really reflect on it, until it's addressed, these things shape every choice. People end up kind of making decisions not based on their authentic desires, but on avoiding rejection. And it's normal. Neuroscience research on memory reconsolidation is really great part of this. It shows that when old trauma patterns are reactivated and then paired with new safe experiences, the brain can literally rewire those beliefs. I really believe, this is why trauma recovery isn't just about coping, it's about changing the story the brain holds on to. If anybody did happen to link to the TED Talk I spoke about last week, it was The Call to Courage by Brene Brown that was on Netflix. I found that, she really speaks a lot about changing our story and reflecting, like, the story that I love the language, like, the story that I have in my head, or the story that I pieced together is this. And then unpacking that either in a coaching session or in a relationship, saying, like, can you help me unpack this? How do you see this? Because sometimes the story that we hold on to is really rooted in these limiting beliefs. So let's look a little bit at more at like what grips us, the role of guilt and duty. It is a big one. I have so many clients, that's so interesting, friends, colleagues, that the conversation we often have is the relationship maybe with a parent, and where guilt is held there. And one of the strongest emotions kind of tied to approval is guilt, right? Especially for those who feel duty bound to family, or maybe cultural expectations. It's normal. Many trauma survivors sometimes carry a real sense that if they choose themselves, they're betraying others. And this guilt can be really crushing. It can be really hard to kind of work through. Sometimes it locks people into overgiving, overcommitting, never feeling free to prioritize their own needs. But that leaves somebody feeling like suffocated, metaphorically. The truth is, taking care of oneself is genuinely like not betrayal. Again, coming back to that, putting that mask on an airplane. I've mentioned the metaphor before, but I think that it's powerful to remember in that moment on an airplane, they say you need to put the oxygen on you first, because if you're okay, then everything else around you will flow better. And the people that you are supporting, you will have the energy to do so. And taking care of oneself is not selfish. It's not betrayal. That is also survival, right? It's survival. It's how we take care of our mental well-being. And it's how a person builds the capacity to be present in healthy ways instead of really drained by obligation. And getting back to kind of really healing that root cause. Um, how do we actually move beyond it? That's kind of where we're kind of trying to get to. Now that we know so much about it, maybe you can recognize it in yourself or others, even. It's a great thing to pass on all of this knowledge to friends and family and children. But the key is not to fight behavior, but to heal the root. And that means these things. One, again, these could be points in your one-to-one coaching with Bond or your group chats, but understanding the childhood or early experiences that created the pattern, that's how we start getting down to the root. So even reflecting on that in some sort of aspect, what was childhood like? Could anything, a relationship in particular, have impacted on you seeking approval? Sometimes it's just part of like cultural, it's what's around us. It's also reaffirmed in schools, maybe with a teacher or, unkind children. It could be a big mix of all of it. Another way to kind of get to the root, which I really love, like naming things, but naming the emotions that drive it. So your approval, if you could name or draw in the body, this is your stick person. I love a good stick person to recognize where you're feeling these things in the body. But where do you feel things when you're seeking that approval? When somebody, maybe you don't feel like you're getting approval from somebody, like let's flip it on that script. How does that make you feel? Is it shame? Is it fear? Is it guilt? Is it insecurity? Is it worried? Is it, just pure being uncomfortable? And naming those emotions, they get to the root. That's you being like, hey, like this is the feeling. And then we start working with the nervous system so that disapproval no longer feels like life or death. And that's where all of this work, all of the body work, come back to, if you've not got to module 3 in particular, I know that one the best, obviously, because I've led on it and I worked especially on like letting go in the body. But so many things that Bon works with, her butterfly tap, right on the collarbones, taking a deep breath within that, maybe joining me now if you like, breathing in and slowly breathing out. We need to kind of think, I need to kind of shake this off in the body. And then I can start to recognize like that it's not life or death. If I cannot help this person today, if I cannot, you know, meet what they're asking me, if I say no. And that's where we start to rewire those beliefs, right? Rewiring the beliefs into truths that align with the presence, with that phrase, I am enough. You are. You absolutely are. You are enough in every little aspect of who you are, and you need to start believing it. And that's what we're kind of working on, right? With all this knowledge, your worth is not dependent on others at all. And I can choose for me. There's a point where I really recognized like I couldn't even tell you like what I wanted for lunch. I was looking around to see what other people were ordering and full on copying. And that is like, as a young adult, I couldn't make a decision for myself. And then, it was small steps that started to trickle into recreating different, decisions for me, boundaries with friends, small steps like actually looking around and being like, I think that I would like that sandwich and not seeking approval. I'm like, do you like this? Well, don't, what should I get? I know it sounds small, but if any of this resonates, maybe making those small decisions will eventually allow you to say no. If actually in your body you think, I really like this is a great friend, but I cannot watch, their 3 children and with my own for the day and cook for them all day and know that, that just doesn't feel good for you this weekend, uh, you know, just say, look, I'm really sorry, but we just can't do that this weekend. And if that's what's the better choice for you or your family, for your well-being, just because you need that weekend just for time with your own or Claire, that's not selfish. It's, you don't have to make those choices because you think someone's going to like you. And I think that that's where we just learn to find our way and go, I'm going to choose for me. I'm going to choose for me. I'm going to choose what's right for us. And when this kind of deeper healing really starts to happen, I think that you're getting there. I think that this approval seeking kind of softens. And I think that that's a great word for it because I still do feel that natural, there's a few little niggles that, that I do seek approval for sometimes. I think as a generation, many of us like I think I'm on the like borderline of like a millennial, but there's like that millennial, maybe you're not in that kind of age where there was so much well done, well done. Sometimes that even in itself, like what's going on in terms of our environmental features, we have to learn to be happy with what we've achieved, whether we have a certificate and a pat on our back, or not. And I think that those things can start to lead to, those great, resilient, healthy places where we can start to really feel contentus with who we are. And the question that I ask myself every, time I get into a place where I'm just not feeling good enough, that limiting belief creeps in, I always ask myself at the end of the day, and I hope you can take this with you as a small little strategy. I always kind of get to the end of the day and ask myself if I'm ruminating, if I'm overthinking something, I'd kind of just say like, did I do my best today? you know and my brain is gonna kind of maybe seek like did I, but actually in the moment, with a migraine and all the pressures of what's around me, did I do my best like with what I had? Yeah, I did. Did I show kindness today? Yeah. Did I hurt anybody? Well, if you did, we reflect on how can I maybe take responsibility and find my way through that tomorrow, you know and most often the answer to that is usually no. And that's where you just need to draw the line. You're kind, you know you mean no harm. Remembering that's such a powerful one. You're kind, you mean no harm, and you've done your best with what you had in this day, and your best can be very different every day. Your best doesn't have to be climbing to the top of the mountain and achieving all of those things. Your best could be getting up and getting through all the things on your list, or maybe even just getting up if emotions overwhelming you at the moment. And so remember, like, did you do your best with what you had today? Probably, yeah. And if you do, I want you to sleep soundly with that phrase, like, then I am enough and I've done enough today. One of the key affirmations that I love, maybe you can write it down, is I am enough, I have enough, and I do enough. And what I mean by that is not, the I am enough is quite straightforward, but I have enough is I have all the tools. I have a clear mind. I have the ability to access, people and resources. And, you're obviously part of this course. You can access, content. You have everything in you to work through everything you need. Even if you're thinking about like what you have around you, you do have enough, I am enough, I have enough. And sometimes I think there's this power in saying like, I do enough, I did enough. I'm gonna leave my day here and I did enough. I did enough. And even if your brain tells you you didn't actually, bring it back. You woke up, you took a few deep breaths. Well, hopefully more than a few, well, maybe a few deep ones, but you're breathing, you're here, you're doing what you need to do if you have that ability. And if not, you're up, maybe seeking the help that you need. Just ask yourself, I am enough, I do enough, I have enough. And that is a really great script that started me out rewiring my thinking before bed. I am enough. I have enough. I do enough. I am enough. I have enough. I do enough. And there starts to become like a reality. My brain starts to search for that. Actually, there is a truth in that. There's a truth in all three of those statements. And I hope that that supports you as you kind of move through the rest of your week and your healing journey. So yeah, you know, just understanding, naming the emotions, working on the nervous system, rewiring the negative beliefs, all of it helps our decisions become clearer, relationships become healthier, and people begin, start to feel that little bit of peace in choices that once maybe left them, in knots. And I would really highly recommend the Let Them Theory book as an add-on to this. I could definitely, I think I might bring my Wellbeing Wednesday talk. I might look a little bit closer at the Let Them Theory. I have done one on an aspect of it, but I think it's such an incredible theory, and it might add in really nicely with this week's, obviously, this deep dive. So watch this space, but have a little look at it if you want. So yeah, let me just close it off for you. Approval feels like survival. Okay. When someone has lived through trauma, it just does. It feels like survival. But the truth is, safety doesn't come from other people's opinions. Let me say that again. Safety does not come from other people's opinions. And remember, that's all they are. They're people's opinions, right? It's just their judgment, you know. It comes from inside. That's where approval comes from. It comes from in you. It's something that you can work on, rewire. And every step of trauma recovery is about moving from needing approval to really starting to trust yourself, trust your decisions. And again, that can be like small things that might build into, setting those like healthy boundaries and just saying no. And when that shift really happens, honestly, it's powerful. But people really do discover something incredible, that their life is truly no longer defined at all by who approves of them. It's defined by who, they choose to be, or who you choose to be. Yeah, I'm going to leave you on that note. And I'm going to say thank you for joining me the last 2 weeks, on this deep dive. Yeah, thank you for watching it on replay. And I look forward, this Wednesday. I am doing Wellbeing Wednesday. So maybe I'll see you. I'll be live in the group at that point at 8 p.m. But also, if that time zone doesn't link, it'll go through Bond's Facebook this time rather than a YouTube link. But I look forward to coming back at you next week. It's been a joy and a pleasure to fill in for Bond. So thanks for sticking with me. All right, team, peace and love. Have a beautiful day, evening, whatever time you're watching it. And yeah, thanks for listening.